All right. G'day, everyone. Today I'm joined by Liam Doherty, Binance ANZ. Dude, how you doing? Thanks for coming on the show.
Good, Tom. Nice to be on the other side of the interview for once. You've
Yeah, dude.
been on our show a couple of times. Been a great chat. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, man. No, it's always fun to switch up the roles. Dude, we've just had Bitcoin break all-time highs. It's a very, very good week for the sensible, non-degenerate crypto investors out there who responsibly manage their portfolios. Must be nice.
Must be very nice.
Talk to me about where you think Bitcoin's headed over the coming weeks and months.
We've got a fascinating dynamic at the moment because part of what I do at Binance is SEO, search engine optimization. And so we're watching very closely the search traffic, search trends for both Bitcoin and then broader crypto related keywords, which is essentially how many people are Googling things like Bitcoin price, Ethereum price, Dogecoin price. And we're at this really weird place in the market right now where we have very, very still quite low search interest compared to when we had Trump first announced or when Trump won the election in November, October, November. And then when we had the Trump inauguration on Jan, like kind of crescendo of the Trump inauguration and the Trump meme coin between Jan 19 and Jan 21, I think it was. And we are at levels of search interest and I think levels of general like user interest in crypto that we were prior to Trump getting elected. Like we've just started to tick up towards when the election happened and all of a sudden we were on for SBR, we were on for, better regulation, better licensing. We were on for all the positive things that Trump promised to bring as the crypto or Bitcoin president, depending on who you ask. Which means that we have a pretty low level of retail interest and we have all-time high Bitcoin. And I think that's reflected as well in Bitcoin dominance, which is sitting up around, 60%. It's crazy high. And so it's very hard right now not to look at the market as it is and not look at the setup as it is and go, okay, we've got plenty more retail interest to come surging back. We've got plenty of bullish catalysts from the ETFs to SBR to Bitcoin treasury companies to even just MicroStrategy. Got a lot of buy pressure there. It's very hard not to look at where we're at right now and feel very bullish, I think, particularly on Bitcoin in the short to medium term because of those specific kind of macro catalysts. And then on potentially the rest of the market, if we follow history, and they say history rhymes, if we follow history and we start to see the rest of the market catch up, see retail interest come back through, and we see altcoin season kind of take off, then it really does feel like we've moved through the first kind of part of this cycle if we compare it historically. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like we could have black swans. There's a heap of macro stuff, like particularly in terms of the US debt. There's a lot to watch there, and we've got stocks at record P/Es. We've got obviously Bitcoin and gold at all-time high, but I think there's demand for those as sovereign bearer assets, right? Neutral reserve assets. So that kind of checks out. And yeah, I think if we have a continual rhyme of previous cycles based on what we're seeing with search traffic and user interest, then maybe we're about to switch towards alt season. But, the seller's pretty bullish on Bitcoin, zoom right out. And yeah, it's hard not to be excited about this asset and the asset class.
Yeah, it doesn't help when Trump kind of wakes up randomly on a given day and says like, hey, 50% tariffs on the European Economic Zone. You're like, fuck, okay, man. Can we have a week like just leaving it? Yeah, what do you see as like one of the main catalysts that would bring retail back? Do you think it's like a continual grind up where prices just keep going up and then just like mid-tier kind of FOMO sets in and people just look and think, holy fuck, what Bitcoin's at what?
I think what brought people back this cycle was that meme coin narrative primarily. And some people started making stupid money in crypto. And as soon as people hear about that, and they, of course, are driven by a greed motivator, everyone wants to make money, then that will bring back general retail interest. Something will pop off and there'll be stories about people making crazy money. And that is what's going to drive retail interest back. At the same time, though, like, I also think there's this undercurrent of people, like, because we have such a different dynamic right now to what we had in 2021 through the COVID bull run, where everybody's getting free money and everybody's punting it on stocks, on crypto, on whatever they wanted, right? We had this crazy everything bubble. But right now, people are hurting so much more. Interest rates went right up. Cost of living went right up. You know, across the West, we've got people who can't afford houses. We've got these crazy asset bubbles that have sustained. And so we find ourselves in a situation where a lot of young people who would have been, you know, participants in previous retail cycles maybe don't have the same level of disposable income, and so maybe are not as predisposed to this. I think there's a financial nihilism side of this too, which I think kind of drove that barbell early on, where we had like memes on one end and Bitcoin on the other. But there's a real undercurrent of people now who are asking the question. And I've seen this from a lot of friends. It feels like, particularly in the last like 12 months, there's been some kind of switch where people have hit a level of pain that has forced them to start asking the question about what is money and why can't I afford the things that I would like to be able to do with my life? Why doesn't the good salary that I thought I had get me the things that I thought it would get me when I got it? And so I think for me, like, alongside, you know, what's driving gold at the moment, there's that real undercurrent of fundamental change in the way people are thinking about money and learning about money. And I'm right in the demographic that does this, right? And I also work in crypto. I also like talking about Bitcoin. And so there's probably some selection or confirmation bias there. But I do truly believe that people are getting to the end of their tether a little bit on how much you can inflate a money supply. And they've gone looking for answers, and some of them have landed on Bitcoin. So I think we're going to see... I definitely think we're going to see some kind of alt season pop off again, right? Like, it's just, there's too much money in this space. There's too much momentum, and it happens as soon as there's some liquidity available. Like, it'll flow into alts, it'll flow into memes, and we'll have a bunch of stupid money being made again. But I also think that there's a real building fundamental movement behind Bitcoin, and it's driven by, you know, the pain people are feeling. It's driven by how credible this asset class and that specific asset now appears, with ETFs, with BlackRock, with the US president behind it, that's really opening up the conversation. And we saw a couple of pieces in Australia last week around boomers starting to move into Bitcoin, starting to move into crypto as well. And I think, you know, we still have an enormous latent public that has looked at this asset class with skepticism, curiosity, for a long time, but they really are, I believe, starting to move in. And so, yeah, we'll see. There's a bunch of factors there and a bunch to watch. So I think we'll get, to summarize, I guess, we'll get some element of that alt season. We'll get some element of silly crypto season, which will be fun. But I do think there's a fundamental movement behind Bitcoin that is changing, and to a point, decoupling that asset from the rest of the industry, and is going to be driving ongoing demand and decreasing volatility over the next kind of 1 to 2 years, but also like 5 to 10 plus years.
No, like the rubber stamping of ETFs in the US is just like one of those
enormous
big things, right? Where even my dad, who's just like profoundly risk averse, in terms of like investing, he's very much like puts it in super, doesn't have really a portfolio. Stock picking is just one of those things that's too far along the risk curve for him. He's like, yeah. Even he was like, oh, Bitcoin. I was like, holy shit. I'm being approached and like asked about Bitcoin as a sensible investment. So there's that approval. And I do think that you just have that kind of bifurcation of your two markets of like, there's sensible assets, Bitcoin moving like slightly further down, maybe ETH, Sol, some of these other alts that do stuff gradually push into that kind of category as well of like trusted blue chips. At least with the broader public, I think with crypto natives, that goes without saying, they're already there. But in the general eyes of the public, if you ask people about Ethereum, what the fuck is that, is still basically like the response that you get. And then outside of that, then you just have pure risk on. And I think that speculation is one of those form factors for crypto of like people go to crypto to try and run up an egregious amount of money very quickly. And that's kind of a feature, not a bug. Like that will always be there. But yeah, speaking of like Aussies that own crypto, because you'd have like a fair bit of insight into this with your background. I know there's a lot of kind of studies, surveys out there that say like 20 to 30% own crypto, but purely anecdotally, if you speak to people on the street, most people don't know what it is. Very few people invest like a meaningful amount toward it. In most portfolios, it'd be somewhere between like 1% and 5%, I imagine, even for people that are more risk on and have an understanding of it. And then on the other side of that, there's a lot of people that just bought a shitload of XRP or Cardano in like 2016 and are like, oh, fuck yeah, I've got 200K in this dog shit that, sorry, the XRP army. And that's why they hold it. But like, having worked exchange side, what do you think that the biggest like impediment to getting Australians into crypto is, or has been over time?
I mean, this is the problem I try and face, the problem I try and solve every day. There's probably a couple ways to look at it. And I think when we do the research, we find that Australians actually do have a really high propensity for crypto. Depending on who you ask, there's 2.5 to about 4 million Aussie crypto investors. And given that by the time you take, the elderly and children off of the general populace, you can round that to about 20. And so we've actually got fairly strong penetration rates in Australia compared to some other markets. Asia is much stronger, but Asia has, definitely not as good financial services, generally speaking. And so for Australia, where we have very good financial services, it's a pretty strong penetration rate. The financial services are probably one impediment. Like, I was having an interesting conversation with a friend a little while ago, and I was talking about stablecoins. I was like, you can send them anywhere almost immediately, very cheaply. And she said, yeah, but I could send via Osco immediately for free.
True. Pay ID.
Yep, that's fair. Yeah. And so our financial infrastructure is pretty good, which means that I think there's less demand for medium of exchange use case here than there is in some other places, particularly those without, relatively stable currencies like the Aussie dollar, where there's a real flight to US dollar stable coins. You can see that in a bunch of markets all over the world. In Africa, in the Middle East, in Turkey, that stable currency and the global reserve currency demand is much higher than it is in Australia. I don't know anybody who just holds US dollars for holding US dollars' sake because they're scared that the Australian dollar's going to, hyperinflate 50% or whatever.
Yep.
So we're competing against what is already a pretty good set of products, suite of services. And of course, we have, relatively few number of banks. So we've got, people call it a banking monopoly. We've got 4 major banks. And so that market is fairly tightly controlled and pretty well serviced. So for us, locally, we need to work on how are we going to offer products and services that are fundamentally better than what already is available on the market, and doing that through the medium of crypto, which is new, which has some skepticism around the brand of crypto, and I think that's a real challenge for us. But what is working in our favor is that Australians have a very strong propensity for investment. We love investing in this country, and it comes from, property, but generally speaking, we all have super. So we're all have some form of investment vehicle, even if we've never consciously gone ahead and invested in something. And then we have pretty high rates of like stock ownership, property ownership, property. It's hard to get away from property. It's like the golden goose, right? But yeah, I think broadly speaking, we like to put our money to work and try and make money with our money. And so we've got that as a balancing factor against the fact that we have quite good financial services.
Okay. Yeah, like strangely, I feel like not strangely, probably makes a lot more sense, but there's a much stronger narrative for Bitcoin in the US. I think it ties into that like libertarian ethos. There's like the freedom element. There's that understanding of like an increasing national debt. Some see Bitcoin as an escape hatch in terms of like, oh, it's a hedge against inflation. It's a hedge against debasement. All that kind of, and it moves along the risk curve, moves along the risk curve towards like destroy all banks, and we only need one sovereign asset, depending on how far you want to go down the laser eye kind of rabbit hole. But I'm not sure, and this is just like some broad spray skepticism towards that understanding of Bitcoin in Australia. How do you see the narrative for Bitcoin in Australia evolving? And how does that fit into like the Australian economy, where I think that people understand that like, the Aussie dollar isn't the strongest it's ever been, at least paired against USD, but there's not really that same sense of like, oh, I need to have a sovereign asset. It's my freedom, essentially.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I think about a lot. Where I feel like I've arrived on Bitcoin in Australia versus Bitcoin in other markets is, and particularly against the US, is kind of along the lines of what you've outlined. But where the US has that kind of Republican, libertarian, streak to it, and there's a really strong undercurrent of that in the US founding story, in the Civil War, in things like gun rights. Like, they have that really strong narrative of self-sovereignty, of liberty, of defending your rights and defending your freedom. And we just don't have that here. And Trump tapped into that, right?
Yeah.
But in Australia and in a bunch of other Western countries around the world, in Europe and elsewhere, and Canada, right, which have also recently had elections, they've swung to the left. They've swung to the left quite hard. And I think for me, when I look at where we're at as a country and what we are all working on and what we're all working towards, we have a scenario where we are very happy with the level of service that the state provides. And so we're not necessarily, as a country, going looking for other alternatives and other solutions. I was looking at some data the other day, and Australia has nearly, I think, double the level of public servants per 1,000 people than almost a second market.
Yeah.
I can't remember who that was.
I think it's 50% of new jobs since the start of 2024 have been public sector.
100%. We have
This is wild.
Huge amount of NDIS spending. We have these massive government programs. We, Albo almost won an election on Medicare. And this is the environment where, I see friends who lean left politically and who I think maybe even embody where we're at as a country, which is the fact that if I go to work as a teacher, or I go to work as a nurse, or I go to work as a firefighter or an AMBO, I go to work and I deliver a good public service, and I should be rewarded for that. I should have great healthcare. I should have, good services in my local area. My roads should all get fixed. They're happy with the level of service that the government provides in return for what they deliver for society. And all of those jobs are really meaningful jobs, and they do great things, and we rely on them for many things. But I think what particularly that most recent Australian election tells us is that is the vast majority of people who were happy with Labor, who are happy with that kind of environment, kind of spending, and they're pretty happy with the level of service that the state is providing, which means that they're not looking for the alternative in the way that I think the US has been, and in the way the US did under Biden, in response to Trump. I also think that we can over analyze this, because I have friends who sit much further on the right than I do, who talk about that big, emotional story of Trump winning the hearts and minds of America. And while he did, whether it's about the freedom and those kind of values and reducing the debt, whether even that plays into it in any large part for your average American, who by all reports, I haven't been to the country, but who by all reports doesn't have the highest IQ, whether we're just overanalyzing this because we're just overthinking, overcooking it and going like, oh yes, like we have a narrative, we believe in this sovereign asset, and broadly speaking, we believe in freedom and we believe in fiscal responsibility, and we've just over applied our own thinking, our own ideologies to this result. And it really could just come back to the fact that inflation was bad under Biden, and a slice of middle America went, we'll give the other guy a go. Yeah. And if Trump doesn't bring down inflation, it'll swing back the other way. And, we've just overthought all of this and attached a narrative where there's really just price sensitivity about your eggs or your groceries. It's interesting that didn't happen so much in Australia. But again, I think we've got, we're not yet at the point of Max Payne. And we seem to be a very, I don't want to say a submissive population, because I think that's starting to take it out of context a bit.
I think you're on the right tangent of Aussies love a fucking rule. Everyone thinks we're hell laid back and chill, but it's no.
Yeah,
love a rule.
So the fact that property is out of control, the fact the cost of living is crazy high, and the fact that all of the young people I know stress regularly about buying a house, they don't see the system as necessarily the problem. They don't see the state as monetary policy or monetary issuance as a part of that problem. They just think that housing is more expensive and they need to work harder, or they need to help get their parents to help. So yeah, we're in a funny little space. I know that I've heard people talk about Bitcoin in the US as a partisan issue, and they say it's not left and right, it's generational. But I know from my own experience, particularly in Australia, I think people who lean right tend to be a lot more open to Bitcoin. People who lean left tend to be more closed. And given where we're at as a country and the way that I think we're leaning, if not maybe even accelerating towards the left, I think Bitcoin is serving a niche market in Australia when it comes to self-sovereignty, neutral reserve asset, because our debt's blowing out and we're going to have to pay for that. We don't seem to be that interested. I think we also have a level of brain drain here that maybe the US doesn't have. So many young, smart people I know are moving to other countries for opportunities, to work for businesses, to work in crypto, moving to Singapore, moving to Dubai, moving to the US now as well. And that takes away the people who are potentially going to be advocates or actively, working on this tech or these ideas here. And I think, that maybe is changing our dynamic a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But like I said, I still think there's that fundamental undercurrent of people who are really starting to ask that what is money question. But I do think we're a little bit further behind.
Yeah. Well, there's a really good guy called Andrew Bailey who wrote a book called Resistance Money on Bitcoin that kind of makes a centrist argument for Bitcoin that kind of services objections on both the left and the right towards Bitcoin. I'm actually going to get him on the show really, really soon. But yeah, no, that was one of those books that I flicked through and was like, this is sensible. This makes an approach where you don't have to be a right-wing libertarian. It automatically leans that way. But yeah, in Australia with Albo, it was as much a victory for Albo as it was the kind of self-immolation for the Liberals as well. They really didn't do much to help himself on the campaign trail. But yeah, man, crypto is one of those strange industries where, and you talked about this a bit before, where people go down out of almost economic hardship or economic stress. They kind of then have to ask themselves these questions of man, what the fuck is going on? I'm playing by the rules. I'm doing what I'm told. things are not happening for me. There's a lot of stuff to do with like a digital revolution that have a large effect on that. But crypto is one of these industries where you can kind of port over skills from other fields like finance, maths. Poker players tend to do really fucking well in crypto. Surprise, surprise. But most people tend to go down this rabbit hole from this perspective of economic hardship, and they look into money, econ, and then self-educate and figure things out along the way. What have been some of your favorite resources on making sense of money as a non-economist? Kind of just like as an enthusiast, enjoy your from the sidelines.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Because you need to learn a whole lot of stuff that you don't get taught in school, and often challenges the way that you look at the world. Mm-hmm. And it requires you as well to get past your ego and consider what you've done and the score for what you've done so far, which is how much money you have, and think about whether you were actually using the right playbook or using the right approach in terms of, winning that game, if you like. And so it's a journey that challenges you, and it's a journey that will make you think again about a lot of those assumptions that you made, and it'll change your friends. It'll change the people that you can talk to and hang out with. But the best part about this industry is still the people, and the way the people invest so much time and energy, yourself included, in educating other people and sharing that journey and being pretty transparent about the learning process that they're going on. And so, yeah, the people and the resources that have grown out of this industry are phenomenal. And that has been really, really cool to be a part of and then to participate in as well. So I love Audible and I love Spotify. I'm a real audio guy. Mm-hmm. And so I've listened to heaps and heaps of books, heaps and heaps of podcasts, and they're all done by people, particularly on the Bitcoin side of things. Like, they're done by people who just believe in what we're all kind of working on and believe in that mission. And so there's no hard sells. They're just opinions or, factual analysis, which makes it a really incredible learning journey, basically. So yeah, I think what I say to people, I try and refer people to Bitcoin Standard or the big print book that Lawrence Lepard's just brought out as really good starting points. And then, people can kind of go down the rabbit hole from there.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. The getting into crypto thing's funny because it's like I had friends that were extremely into it in university that were going to blockchain meetups. One of my friends was getting a job straight out of uni in finance in a quant firm in Sydney, well, prop shop more than a quant firm. And they were just maniacal about it. They're like, dude, you have to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I literally for the longest time was like, oh. Dude, it's too much of a hard sell. I feel like I'm being roped into a cult. I'm not coming to the blockchain meetup at Unibar with 3 other guys on a Thursday night. Sorry, boys, that's not happening. But then slowly I started to see, I think self-interest kicks in over time. I was fairly observant of markets at that point. I was being very, very pedestal about it, but I was gambling on specky mining stocks on fucking hot copper. So, who am I to throw stones at the guys in crypto at this point in time? But the most interesting thing that I think really pricked my ears up was seeing the smartest people and the dumbest people I could imagine making phenomenal amounts of money in the industry. And I was like, I wonder if there's some room in the middle. And it turns out that there is.
Journalism. I could sell both of them nothing.
Jesus, dude. From the top rope, man.
Sorry.
No longer a journalist, no more. Thank goodness. Oh, holy shit. No, exactly. But yeah, no. I mean, that was a really good way to get involved in the industry. Just I got to ask questions to everyone. But yeah, no, that was just one of those things where I was like, okay, cool. This starts to make sense. It was also the idea of, especially COVID watching everything move online. For a longest time, I just thought like digital items, the only reason they'd be valuable is for like gamers and fucking nerds, basically. I was like, oh yeah, that's for computer guys. And then watching the entire world rearrange itself to be like, no, we're going to try and run every business on the internet now. Everything is going to occur online. You're going to do Zoom calls. You're going to sit at home, and we're going to figure out a way to make this everything via the internet. And things held up pretty well, considering. Like, you couldn't have done that 50 years ago. Shit, the wheels would have fallen off. That's disregarding spending and policy and the whole COVID situation. But it was really interesting where things that were digital were suddenly given precedence over things that were physical. And I was like, okay, sure, I can get around the narrative longer term. This makes sense. If we're going to do everything on the internet, it makes sense to have like a native asset that holds value online, especially if we're going to transfer value via the internet. It's no longer this risky, kind of like scammy space. But yeah, man. I think like one of the other big reasons that Aussies don't get, I mean, I'm making some assumptions, but like the reason that maybe adoption isn't as strong or as vicious as it is in the United States, particularly with like, you know, the higher net worth guys. Like there are lots of people in the States that would be almost 100% crypto, very, very big advocates for it. We don't have that similar weight in Australia. Probably because, you know, people are, for the large part, property's fucking good enough, man. And it goes back to that thing of Bitcoin being like, oh, well, the left wouldn't really be into it. It's like, well, if number goes up enough, that's a good enough narrative for people to think like, oh, shit. Why is that still occurring? Why is that asset still appreciating? What am I not understanding? Is there still some inefficiency for me there to capitalize on? But yeah, what's your take on Hooms in Australia? I want to get the hot take on the Hoom market because everyone's fucking got one. It's started safe as houses, number go up forever, or it's giant overinflated bubble gonna crash tomorrow.
Yeah.
Exit Hooms now. What's your read?
My read is that I like Matt Barry's take on this, which is housing is the root of all evil in this country. And I think where we're at, I don't know if you read When Money Dies by Adam Ferguson, the book on
I haven't.
Weimar Republic hyperinflation.
Check it out.
And there's another great book on this called Devil Take the Hindmost, A History of Financial Speculation Bubbles. Yep. And having read those books, done a bit of study, this property thing that we have just seems like a massive bubble. And it might sound like a kind of dumb thing to say, but the hallmarks socially seem to check out so well. And again, I'm not an economist. Like I can try and go and do my own data research and I can try and compare, you know, we have 5 of the most expensive cities in the world. We have XYZ. Like, you know,
I think
we
Adelaide's
can do the data.
more expensive than Vancouver. Is one of them.
And if you love churches, that's great. Go and buy an Adelaide. But if you don't, like, man, how are people affording places down there?
Yeah.
But from a social perspective, I think is the call out. Like when you have such crazy consensus that property is the single best investment forever. And I hear that a lot, right? Like,
yeah,
the number of times I've heard you can't lose with property in Australia. When you have that level of consensus take, like I'm not kidding you. Yeah. Like I literally hear those words verbatim.
Yep.
When you have that level of consensus, it makes me nervous, makes me concerned. I think you can look at it in 2 ways from what's going to happen from here perspective though, right? And I'm not a property analyst. I'm way out of my comfort zone here, but either the fact that everything in this country is leveraged on property means that we kill the dollar to save the property, which gets you to a certain point of essentially, you know, hyperinflation and social unrest, and then something resets, right? That's the like Ray Dalio kind of model for it. Or we get like, you know, there's some kind of actual short-term pop driven by a macro black swan that just like completely destroys our generation anybody who's bought a house and has a considerable amount of debt, but maybe saves the people below us, like, people who are 18 to 25 right now who haven't been able to enter the property market, and they might be the beneficiaries. We might be the sacrificial lambs. Like I've bought a house. We might be the sacrificial lambs that pay for that, and our parents will be fine because they've got mostly like low loan to equity ratios, and then the next generation gets to buy, or no debt, and the next generation gets to buy something affordable. In some ways, like, that's the best scenario socially, because clearly this is something that cannot keep going on. If you're a high agency young person in Australia, you are going and you are buying a house to flip it. You are renovating a house. All you care about is buying a house, and the people you look up to have houses or lots of houses. And so, we need to change that mindset. Like, something is going to have to happen that flips that. And when it does, it's going to be very painful. So I know for me, like, having exposure to something which is not domestic property feels like a good idea, which is Bitcoin, right? Because we could completely nuke our housing market, and unless it's like a GFC style global black swan, Bitcoin is probably going to be fine. And, that's my hedge against the local market blowing up. But man, at the same time, I think it's really driving young people like us away from entrepreneurship, away from building cool businesses, away from innovation. It's taking money out of everything productive and putting it into this, speculative asset. But at the same time, like, how much of your super is Big Four bank shares? How much of the Big Four bank shares are leveraged on property? Like, it's 100% residential mortgages in terms of basically like what they're making money on. And so you've got so many levels of leverage that it could be like societally challenging for us to go through that nuke. And, maybe it has to be like a broader macro thing that bombs it, and we all have to change our mind on that.
It's rough when two crypto guys are talking about another market being a giant Ponzi.
Yeah.
Maybe have a think on that.
But I overuse Ponzi, but I think it's like, I actually think we've got to move away from that term, both for like crypto and for property. Like, it's just a market with, a manipulated supply and demand. Yep. And, for as long as that dynamic exists, it'll go in the way that the dynamic suggests, until such point at which, demand changes or supply changes, and I don't think supply is going to change. It'll move.
Well, this is the big thing. It's like the most predictable factors that would, point towards a downturn are largely controlled by government. So it's like, unless government starts cutting immigration hard, which I think Albo spoke about briefly for about a year ago, but then signed trade deals that opened up immigration with other countries. So it's like, okay, bit of, like posturing more than real talk of like, don't worry guys, I'm addressing it. No, I'm not.
And Australia is such a fantastic product. Like, when you live
everyone
here,
wants to live
pretty
here,
freaking good. And if you go to other places around the world and you think about actually living there, Australia is amazing. Like, the sky is beautiful and blue. I went for a surf this morning. Like, I can be pretty prosperous here. Life is amazing.
Healthcare.
I'm not physically threatened. My healthcare is brilliant. Like, I'm not in danger. And if a big world war breaks out, we're not on the doorstep of it, unless it's us in New Zealand over sheep or something, like, which is not going to happen. And so,
because we'll win really quick.
Yeah, we're gonna our sheep fight way better than their sheep.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you can see why the Australian product is so good and why there's going to be enduring demand for that. And like, I don't think it's in any government's interest to try and deflate that slowly because they're going to lose votes. Like, people want housing to go up because, they feel richer. So it does feel like we're happy to sacrifice the next generation and our birth rate and our innovation and our, interesting businesses and our productivity and our entrepreneurial spirit for keeping this going. And at some point that will change. Like, but what pops it in the short term, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah, a friend of mine with the immigration side of things gave me an example of like why he's just turbo bullish on Australian property forever. Basically, it was like, say you have like a 195 sided die with all the countries on the world on it. You roll Australia, you have a 195 sided die. Whatever you roll on, you have to live there. You get a couple rolls. It's like you land on Australia. You really going to roll again? It's like, no, it's probably top 5, 10 choices for anyone in the world, blind roll. So 100%. That's the thing. So, I mean, you have China's population, which I think is like 1% of is bigger than Australia. So, like significantly 5 times bigger. Mate, cautious of time. Wrap the show up with a little segment that I like to do. Just moving forward, most bullish on, most bearish on. What's your read?
Most bullish on Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin so much. I'm a closet maxi and I just love reading, learning, hearing takes about Bitcoin. I think the smartest people I know are working in Bitcoin, working in crypto. And yeah, to get the chance to participate in that conversation, that learning journey for other people and to work in the space is such a privilege, such a pleasure. And I think, I love my job. I love where I'm at right now in life and just broadly that opportunity is down to Bitcoin, and that makes me super bullish because I think the chance for me to share that with more people is super exciting. What am I bearish on? Man, I'm generally an optimist, but I don't know if I can come up with something I'm super bearish on. I'm bearish on the US debt. I'm bearish on the 10-year and on Japan's 10-year too. But then that's bullish for us. I was listening to the latest All In pod yesterday, which I feel like is a great place to go and get a mid-curve take. And they've been so mega.
It used to be fantastic. It used to be awesome. And then they just went like, Ukraine. And I was like, fuck, guys. Talk about startups again.
Yeah.
Come on.
Chamath and Sachs obviously have been like super MAGA movement, and Friedberg kind of got to go with them, and they did the White House thing, and they've been involved in the administration, and they were super bullish on Trump and on US dominance and US as a global superpower and on the policies. And then we get this big beautiful bill that's going to drive more deficit spending, and listening to them kind of like reluctantly kind of flip on that was really interesting yesterday. And so that would be what I'm bearish on now, is the US's ability to actually turn the tide and go against, the tide and bring down spending. Like, I think for broadly speaking, Doge is the best initiative maybe, in US politics, and for all intensive purposes, I think it will have failed once it all wraps up, which means that deficit's going to keep blowing out, and for us in Australia, for us in the West, like losing the global consumer and the global cop is maybe going to change our world not for the better. And so probably bearish on the state of the US as the global superpower. I really think we're moving towards a multipolar world, and that might be one that is not as secure, not as stable as the world has been under a US world order. But I also think it's a world in which a neutral sovereign reserve asset will be very useful. So I'm kind of bullish on that too.
Okay. That's why we need more tariffs. You heard it here. All right, man. Dude, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can people go to find you, and what have you got coming up next that you want to point people to?
So find me on Twitter at Liam Odo, ODOH, and I run the weekly show for Binance Australia, which Tom has been a guest on a couple of times now.
Binance Beach, go check it out.
As well. So come and hear me ramble and talk about crypto. And Old Season is on the show this week.
So, Old Season. Fuck yeah.
Come and get me.
Legend. Appreciate you, man.
You too, mate. Good chat.